1, 2, 3. Can you hear me? Cool, that's good. All right, welcome everyone. This is the Grafana talk about mixing metrics and logs. Welcome, I'm David. I work for Grafana. I am the director of UX. And I work a lot on the Explore mode, the Explore area. That's a new feature within Grafana, and also do a lot of work on Prometheus and Loki, which is our new log aggregation system. And but today I'm going to talk more about Grafana and Influx. And I think the big thing to realize now is that Grafana is not just a general dashboarding tool, but Grafana is also on a journey to becoming a well-versed observability platform to support your classic DevOps use cases. And we're also advanced a bit on the data sources that we support. So now we support all 3 big cloud vendors, for example, as direct data input, and also Influx is obviously up there as well. And we had a pretty big milestone in February, releasing 6.0. Just quick show of hands. Who here is using version 6 and higher already? Cool, yeah. Anyone else still on 5? Cool. 4? No, just kidding. Yeah, okay. Oh, actually, someone there, cool. Yeah, so yeah, I guess what you're missing out on is the new panel editing experience, where previously you had to choose a style, like let's say line graph first, and then add the query, and then you couldn't really change back to figure out which visualization style would be best suited for your data. But now you can sort of toggle through. So that's new, and then we also released the Explore feature, which I'm going to show later a bit more. Version 6.2 is our latest release. In there we have a new bar gauge, which looks really pretty, and I think we're going a bit in the opposite direction that chronograph is going. Chronograph is going really slick. We're going a bit retro, but you can turn that off to the gradients if you like. And I think the feature that I'm actually more excited about in 6.2 is lazy loading, which is the parts of a really long dashboard that you don't see. Those graphs are not being loaded. So I think this is like a bit of an underappreciated feature, and it's kind of difficult to like make a big announcement about, but I think it has a pretty high impact to pro users. So, but let's talk a bit about Grafana and Influx. So who here is using Grafana and Influx together? Cool, that's actually a lot of people. Cool, so you're probably then very familiar with this sort of setup where you have a panel editing mode there with the click editor, the click query editor for building InfluxQL queries. And that's working solidly, and it supports database authentication via username and password. And what's coming in addition now is if you want to not be sort of distracted by all these panel editing, like visual styles and all this stuff, then you can switch into the Explore mode, which will take over the query. And in there, you can just modify the query without having the fear of modifying the dashboard. And this is sort of to support this DevOps story where you want to just drill down a bit more, change some queries to figure some things out, and it's using the same query builder. Similarly, there's a table view, so you can also have a quick look on what your data is looking like, and kind of cycling through the value fields. So let's get a bit to the meat of this talk, actually, which is about logging also within Influx. And log aggregation is sort of becoming like a centerpiece for this troubleshooting story or for the observability story that Grafana wants to support more and more. So, and then this journey, it usually starts with an alert, and then the alert brings you to a sort of dashboard, and then there you try to modify some queries for some drill down, and then afterwards you get a pretty good idea on which process or which server might be acting up, and then you want to pull up logs to see a bit more detail on what went wrong potentially. And then later in future versions, we might add some distributed tracing for this as well. Sometimes actually you might not even have a dashboard or metrics to begin with. And for those kinds of people, logging might be the only option to figure out what went on at all. So yeah, just saying log aggregation is quite central in this. Another important aspect about aggregating logs in the first place and not just having them on the machines is what if the machine goes away? Then your logs go away as well. So that's sort of one of the main reasons why log aggregation makes a lot of sense, to have this central place to store your logs. And then log aggregation systems. So in this instance, Influx also gives you a query language to do a bit of analytics based on the logs itself. Influx itself, though, is a time series database that just happens to have the value capability of string, right? So we're sort of abusing this for logs, but turns out it works, right? Which is what I'm going to demo later. So, and then one of the appeals also of just using Influx for logs in this setup is that you don't need a second system anymore to store your logs. If the use case that I'm going to show is like enough for you. Cool. So once we get comfortable with the idea of storing the logs in Influx, we should think about how we're using Influx paradigms to isolate log streams and to like properly tag and label them. And the main driver behind this, or the importance of this is usually when you aggregate all the logs into a single place, you just end up with this big pile. And if you later want to revisit this, and there's just a long stream of messages, you're going to have a really tough time finding exactly the message that is going to tell you what was going wrong, basically. So we're going to use logs just as a measurement, just naturally, and then as a value field, we're just going to choose message. And then tags really gives us this flexibility to isolate these log streams. And those can be, for example, isolation by data center, host. Can also be a file name. You can really put in there whatever you like. But the idea is that later you want to eliminate as many logs that you don't want to be seeing by properly filtering for tags. So, and then the next question is, how do we get logs into Influx? And one of the obvious features is Influx has an API, so we can, I'm not even sure if that's easily visible, but this is a Node.js client library for Influx. And you can just use the write points function, and you give it, you just have to give it the measurement logs. Actually, that's arbitrary, but and you give it the message fields, and then when you then use it, you would call it with a set of tags. And in this example, I'm calling it with app/myapp and server 01. And then I can also extend this later to give it a couple more value fields if I want to have an experience where other fields can give me extra data. So sometimes this programmatical log generation is maybe not the right thing. And for that, we also have Telegraph. If, for example, you would just like to follow, or you would like to tail some log files that exist already, and Telegraph has that inputs that inputs plugin called log parser. And this particular one, I'm tailing the logs in the var log directory and also the Grafana log. And then here in the parser settings, I'm saying everything that's being seen in there should end up in the measurement logs and in the message field, right? So this is how I can make sure that I will end up with this with the data in the shape that I can later consume it within Grafana. There's a third method that I found on the internet. I haven't really tried this first, but if you have a setup where you already have syslog daemons running on your nodes, then fluentd could also be an option to get your logging data into Influx. Okay, and how do we consume the log data? Well, Explorer has a new log file viewer, or well, it's not really a file viewer, but like log query viewer. And that's in master right now, and it will be released in 6.3 to be compatible with Influx. And that works with 1.7 right now. Soon we're going to try and make it work with version 2 and Flux. And this really supports this tag-based filtering up here. So I'm selecting the logs message, and then up here I have these tags and can filter down, in this example, then by log file. All right, and then the log viewer itself, we try to give it some in-browser analytics, so to say. So in the results, by default, it tries to load 1,000 lines, which we think is a pretty big enough data set to do like simple distributions on, for example, key value pairs. So in this example, I think it's trying to get this one says logger equals data proxy log. So we're going to get the distribution of the values in there over these 1,000 messages. Another feature there is log level extraction. We're going to do it from the message itself. And then we also have deduplication. And another neat feature is you can have multiple of these query rows if you want to sort of multiplex various log files together in that same result set. And then the feature I'm actually most excited about within Explorer is the split view, because that really gives you this this view of looking at metrics and logs side by side. So in this current version, the only sort of correlation factor we support right there is the time range. So in this example, maybe it's 6 hours or something. And then you have to find the tags again. But I think in the future we're trying to automate this so that when you switch from metrics to logs, that your tags will be kept intact. Cool. So let's see if this all works. Let's just remember this demo is now based on Telegraph. So we're going to try and get logs into Influx using Telegraph. And I'm going to have to change this to mirroring. So that's weird. Oh, there we go. So I think I'm going to have to make this a lot bigger. So is this sort of readable, or should I go a bit higher? Okay, so I was running Docker PS here before. Just wanted to see what's running. I'm running an Influx 1.7.6 here, and an older version of Telegraph, but I think it's fine. Like that's going to work anyway. And then some fake data generators from Grafana. There's also a new Influx 2.0 running, but we're going to look at that later. So, and we're using this Docker Compose image, which is part of our, we call them Docker blocks. It's little compose files that help us develop things for various data sources, and this is now for InfluxDB. And in this particular example, we're starting the InfluxDB container, our fake data generator, and Telegraph version. And this Telegraph version has a config file, which is exactly this Telegraph config file, which has exactly this thing configured here. This the log parser settings to get the whatever messages it finds in these log files. It's going to put it in the measurement logs, and it's going to extract everything into the field called message. Okay, so that's running, and then I have my Grafana running. So just quickly go home here. So in the data sources, I have my InfluxDB set up with the standard port. I'm using the Telegraph database, and I've created a Grafana user. So, and then what I always like to do is hit save and test just to see if everything can connect. And yeah, we're green. We're good to go here. And then what I guess you all know is or what you've probably been using already is Influx's panel editor and Influx's panels. So this all works. And then I was showing earlier how from here, if I then want to modify these queries a bit, I can do this by hitting Explore, and then it jumps to the Explore mode, and I see the same queries again here. And then here I can modify the queries without the dashboard taking effect. So, and then I can zoom in just here on this particular peak. And so now these are like single data points. And the interesting thing now is I can click on the split view, and then now I have two views, and I can have different data sources or like different views of the same data source. So here then, since InfluxDB, now we've set it that it can contain metrics and logs. We can switch over to logs here, and then we have this measurement selector. And so now Grafana doesn't really know which field or which measurement the log messages are in. So this is where we need your help, right? To like click and say, okay, the logs measurement and the message field. Okay, and then it's going to run the query and give us exactly the logs for this time. And then if I scroll on here, so then I can close this. And so now these are the log messages for exactly this time being served by Influx. So let's run this again. And then here, I can also use these tags now. And this would be now really, really useful if I had a couple more hosts, right? Because that's sort of the benefit of having log aggregation. This would have also been a lot more useful if I had already done this here in the metrics view, where here in the where clause, I can do the same thing, right? And so this is what I said before, that in the future we want to have this tag import in the logs query to have that done automatically, so we don't have to. So that works, and I think that's sort of the I guess, the main part of the demo. And what we also really wanted to do, but we didn't quite get to, was to have the same story for Flux. But the important thing here is that you can still use your metrics side by side, so you can compare Influx and Flux, for example, in the same browser window, and this part here also hasn't changed much. So who's using the Flux plugin, which is an external plugin to basically play around with Grafana and Flux? Okay, well, yeah, you like brave souls, and I think there was a lot of disappointment recently because like the APIs changed and we had to catch up and authentication changed. But I think now we're on a good track, and there's a new release of this plugin out now, so that all works. Excellent. So let's go back to. Oh yeah. So just real quick, if you haven't seen this before, the main driver behind this view also is that we show the result set already how it is, so that you can have a better idea on what sort of transformations you're going through when you write these Flux queries. And that's why we show you this raw CSV as well. So let's go back to the presentation. And I have to do this again. Okay, that works. Great. Yeah, so what's the status with Grafana and Influx 2 and Flux? Currently, it's an external data source, and we released 5.3.1 today, basically because something wasn't working there with 5.3. So if you've tried this already in the morning today, I think you should just try it again, basically. What it comes with is this Flux expression editor, and obviously we now support the authentication that's token-based, and that's a bit of a compromise there, because it used to work for 1.7 with the Flux engine already, but then we sort of had to decide, okay, which one do we want to go for? And I guess we're embracing 2.0 now here, but it could be that we're adding some sort of 1.7 support as well. Anyway, you can try this out already with the Grafana CLI plugins installation process. And yeah, if you find any issues, that's the repo link there. And just to quickly recap on if you want to try this out, what the steps you need to go through is obviously run a 2.0 alpha and expose that port, and then you need to create a user and a bucket and an organization. So that's happening in that second step, and then in the third step, you're creating a telegraph config. The sad thing that's missing there is that log parsing is a tile that I'm missing there. This would have, I guess, made the demo even nicer. But that didn't work. So when you go through that step, then at the end you get the telegraph config served by Influx itself, and then you also get the token, so telegraph can talk to Influx and send its data to it. So yeah, you just have to replace those token and config ID strings, and then you should be golden. Yeah, and if you go through all these steps, then this is what you end up with. Okay, so and then a bit of the outlook on what we're trying to do with this. Obviously, it's a bit annoying to have these two data sources. Like, there's the internal one, and then there's the question, does that work with the new one? Probably not. There's the external one, doesn't work with the old one. Well, it used to, now it doesn't. And then so we want to kind of have a bit more clarity and also be a bit more explicit so that there will be only one Influx data source, and you have to say what version you're on, and you have to say if you want Flux or not Flux, right? So that's the bigger the bigger task, I guess. And obviously one of the goals is also that you should be able to query your logs with the Flux query language. And then from like a UX point of view, what we support already in other logging data sources is that you can, that the filters, that the tags, or in other ones called labels, that they are being extracted a bit more easily, so you can click on them. You don't have to go through these different steps anymore to select the key and the comparison and the value. Cool. Yeah, that's all I have. Any questions? Yes?
Will it be possible to use the logs as annotations for time series?
So the question was, will it be possible to logs for annotations in time series? Could be. We haven't really thought about this, just because the volume of logs is so massively different to what we intend or what we intend annotations to be. But I do realize that by specifying a very like filtering query, that you can end up with only a couple of log lines, right? So that would be the use case. So far, that's not really supported, but that's something definitely to think about. Which brings up another question that I've also heard before today, which is why is there no logs panel in dashboards itself? Because we've also heard the use case of people having dashboards for a particular purpose. For example, like a rollout dashboard, and then a typical logging query would search for a keyword or like an error statement that would only happen during an error during that rollout, right? So, and then by virtue of the logs panel being empty, they can be all happy, right? So, but that's missing still, and that's something we're still working on. Yeah.
Is there any chances to hide the tag key from the when you use yield, that it's actually printing tag key and tag value rather than just tag value? On the graphs specifically. On the graphs.
Oh. Yeah, I think that's hard coded. That just puts out everything. But from what I've seen being done in other cases is that you would transform this data set using Flux, using like Flux transformation, I guess functions, to remove certain fields, right? And then you would automatically end up with a result that only has a time series column and a value column. Yeah, so it's more of a, like, you can solve it via the language. Yep.
How likely is that Grafana will put even more effort on developing the Flux data source to catch up with the Flux?
Oh, very good question. Actually wanted to talk about this, Grafana is also growing as a company, and we've doubled in size in the last year, and we're now growing the plugins team. And they have, like, at my request, taken over this Influx Flux plugin. So now, if you've looked on the repo, there's been a lot of movement over the last week already. So yeah, I think we'll pay a bit more attention to the issues that come up there. And I don't know, are you a contributor, or have you posted some issues there, or?
Break so.
Oh, okay, that's good.
A user.
Yeah. Anything else?